Welcome to the Grow Fast podcast, where we talk with leading sales, marketing, and personal growth experts about how companies can accelerate sales, optimize marketing, and grow their businesses fast. Let's go. Hey, David, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Mark?
Pretty good. We had a couple scheduling back and forth issues there, all on me. Thank you for your flexibility, and thank you for coming on the Grow Fast podcast.
Oh, well, if I couldn't be flexible, I couldn't run a software company.
Oh my gosh. After running a software company only for last year, I've taken my flexibility to a whole nother level. There's these little things called bugs and releases and bugs. And every time there's a release, but
right.
Yeah. Hey,
we have to have a whole nother podcast episode then.
Yeah, exactly. Whereabouts are you located?
In the San Diego area, a town called Vista.
Yeah, that's San Diego is one of my favorite areas. In fact, local people say it's not really San Diego, but that whole area from Del Mar all the way up to Carlsbad.
And we're right next to Carlsbad. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're hiring, let me and you pay for relocation costs, let me know. I'll be down there in a heartbeat. Okay.
Right. Yeah, of course. And so would another 100,000 people, right?
Exactly. Wait, normally on the Grow Fast podcast, we talk to people about sales and marketing strategies or proposal writing, with the whole point of is, how companies can grow their business fast. And a lot of times business growth, it comes in the context of sales and marketing, right? But there's a whole nother element of growing your business fast, which is, building products in a kind of lean, agile way, getting it out to market, getting feedback from the market, and then, creating positive iterations on that. And I have a sense that, looking at your experience and background, that you can kind of come at this growing your business fast from that kind of latter aspect of, helping companies scale up their development and stuff. But before we jump into that, maybe you can tell me a little bit about Tekyz and what you guys do.
Sure. And a real quick background. I've been in the software development world for 35 years. I started out in enterprise and then launched my own startup in logistics inventory route distribution, which, despite every effort on my part and my partner's part, we grew it anyway to 800 customers in 22 countries and sold it in 2000 to a publicly traded firm. So had a successful exit, later had a successful failure. And so I've been on both sides of this and launched many different startups. So I really understand and love the startup ecosystem, even though I came from enterprise. So I founded Tekyz 17 years ago. And we've been working with both startups and scale-ups during that time, in particular startups for over 90 during that period. A few of them very successful, but most of them fail. And they fail for the same reasons that companies struggle to scale fast. And that's they lack product market fit. They lack an understanding of being a manager, not a visionary, and what the difference between those two things are. And the idea of testing and building repeatable processes that they can then scale. So these are all things very near and dear to me and close. So what Tekyz does is we develop software, and we do it in a really exceptional way. And what I mean by exceptional is exceptional software teams produce certain types of artifacts that the vast majority of other software teams don't produce. So whenever you're talking to a software team, ask them for the evidence that they can prove to you that they're exceptional. And I could talk about that. That's probably a different podcast, what that looks like. So let's talk about the things that we do to help companies, what they should do. Yeah.
I've been running a SaaS startup for the last, it's been about a year and a half. And it took us about 9 to 10 months to get the product out the door. We get our MVP out there and start circulating the market. And I see there's challenges to grow in this business on both sides, on the development side and getting that product market fit, but also, the sales and marketing element. And that's kind of where historically I've tended to focus. But maybe you can talk about some of the best practices related to, getting the right people on your dev team, getting them working in the right way, creating what you said, those critical artifacts, and then explain possibly. I think you have something called the launch first method, and then maybe you can tie it all into that as well.
Okay, yeah, sure. So start with what makes a competent, the kind of evidence or artifacts you produce when you're a really competent development team. Not competent, but exceptional. Because there are a lot of, and like it's within the industry, there's lots of mediocrity out there, right? And software development's hard. So you have to work hard just to be mediocre. But to be really exceptional, there's things that you do a little bit differently. One is there's a philosophy of continual improvement in terms of your discipline, your protocols, your procedures, your ability to track, project and track. So, for example, when we do our weekly status reports, we have our estimates, our actuals on the status report along with the estimates for week to date, month to date, because we estimate how much effort everybody is going to spend every month on specific things and specifically what deliverables we're going to produce during that period by micro release after micro release after micro release. And then in our status reports, we have the actuals next to those estimates. And if we vary more than 10% from what we estimate, and that's across the whole project, then we do a postmortem to try to figure out where we went off the rails or where managing requirements got out of control or whatever the reason that the actuals don't meet the estimates. And for our largest project last year, and we used to struggle with this like most companies do, we've gotten really, really good at it because of a lot of other things I'll talk about what we do. But last year with our largest clients, our variance was 5.6% across the year. So that was a big win for us in terms of how much more accurate we've gotten. One of the artifacts is how estimates are done. So when there's an estimate, either for a feature or for an entire MVP, or for a new, module or whatever, something large or something small, it's broken down into very discrete modules that are minimum, no smaller than a certain size and no bigger than a certain size, but that are discrete in terms of how much the estimate is for, and that the team is good at accurately estimating not only how much long it's going to take to develop, but all of the other overhead things related to it, such as project management, analysis, design, DevOps, effort if they're QA if it's manually done, or building QA automation if it's automated, or some blend of the two. All of those things are overhead items to the actual development effort for that piece. And that all gets estimated in, and then there's a range, right? There's a low and a high on all these things. And what's that variance? And if it's a really, really well-known requirement, then that variance should be very small. If it's something that's going to be exploratory during the design and development, then the variance is going to be much bigger. And still, even with that, your range should fall somewhere within the range that you set. Architecture is a big one. Really competent teams design everything around microservices, so that microservices are containerized deployment and on-demand type of serverless functionality. So most software companies, their products don't have constant demand. They get these peaks and valleys that are pretty extreme. You might even have 1,000 users, but at any one time, you only have a few people hitting a button that causes any kind of backend server functionality. Every once in a while, you have a bunch of people do the same thing, or you may have a few processes that when somebody submits it, it's processing 1,000 images, and that's a big lift on your server. So what typical companies do is they build all these things as kind of integrated applications running on servers, and they have to have enough server capacity to handle those peaks. What the competent companies do when they're building microservices, and they create, and all this stuff is loaded and it's containerized, then you can take each of these microservices and split them into their own containers, create them as serverless processes, and they now don't have any cost except when there's demand. And their demand periods can be very short, and you're paying very little for that short period of demand, and then the cost disappears. And instead of having all these servers and thousands of dollars a month that you're paying at a minimum overhead, your overhead costs are really low until your systems start to really scale up in terms of demand. Competent teams track everything very carefully, and they're very transparent. So all the team members that are involved in particular aspects of the project are always there with customers, and they're all critical thinkers. And there's a lot more things that exceptional teams do that average teams don't do.
So what I'm hearing you saying is that predictability piece is super important. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're an in-house dev team or if you're working with an outsourced team. You, as the CEO, the founder, the company, the people who are running the company, you need to know what's going to get done and when it's going to get done, and how many resources are required. And if it doesn't get done, why not? So, but if you're typically within 5 to 10% of your estimate, that's pretty good. You also need to be able to make sure that, you're designing a team that can be optimized for usage. So, you want it to be able to be flexible. So if you've got one user right now, you scale, you throttle everything down, but all of a sudden you have 1,000 users on, you can throttle up and meet that demand. And so having smart people that understand how to build that kind of predictability and the cost optimization into your platform is super important. Let me ask you this. I have both. I kind of have a hybrid team, both employees, but also then we work with a firm that provides outsourced services, right? And I think I see pros and cons to both sides. But one of the cons I see to outsourcing is that, maybe there's a perception that the people you're outsourcing to maybe aren't as committed to the cause and aren't as knowledgeable about the cause because they're not, in the day-to-day kind of operations. They're definitely not in the office if they're outsourced overseas. Right. But there could be this perception that they're not as committed, right? They're kind of, what's the word? The hired guns, mercenaries, So, right. Yeah. So what's your counter to that kind of concern?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And it's not because they're offshore or outsourced. It's because of the culture of the company that you hired to do those sorts of things, if that's the case. Because you can have the same thing with employees that you hire too, right? You have some employees who are really committed to the mission and other employees that are there to work. And a lot of that comes from where who the person is, how much experience they have. There are a lot of things that, and the basic process, the basic hiring process that you go through in terms of what you're looking for. So when we're hiring, everyone on our team is experienced. A lot of offshore teams have a lot of really inexperienced people and 1 or 2 people per team that have experience to try to manage and corral everybody else. And you end up with, endless quality problems. You have people that are not as smart, they lack critical thinking. The whole philosophy of teams like that is that they're a lot less expensive to run. And the problem is you get what you pay for. So when we hire, everybody has to be experienced, significantly experienced, because it's too painful for people to learn on the job. But more importantly than that, they have to be really smart. So our very first requirement when we're hiring is, are they smart enough to be on this team? Because if they're not, then everybody else on the team has to carry them. And it brings basically the team is only as good as the weakest member to a certain degree, because that weak member ends up loading everybody else with, either slows everybody down because there's dependencies on the person, or other people have to kind of pick up and support and help that person. And it sends the wrong message to the team that you don't respect them enough to make sure that you're keeping people in that they're going to be working with that are challenging and motivating and smart like they are. That's the very first. And you can't fix IQ, right? You can fix everything except IQ. If there's, integrity is a flexible thing. You want to hire people that are focused on the mission and don't care about anything else. But there's always variations of that. But if they're on a team, they recognize that it's a great team and it's a rare place to work, and they're given their voice and they're able to express their critical thinking and their suggestions and make an investment. All of a sudden they start to become believers and commit to the team. So those are things that can be adjusted. Somebody's work ethic, there has to be a good work ethic there, but that work ethic increases dramatically when they're working with people who love what they do and like the people they're working with. These are all things that culture can address. IQ, you can't. Experience, you can't. But if I had somebody less experienced with a super high IQ, and somebody much more experienced who just wasn't as smart, I would take the less experienced. Let's say they're only 5 years experience versus 10 years. I would take that 5-year person over the 10-year person if they happen to be an outlier, just brilliant.
How do you test for IQ in the context of the work they're expected to do?
So we always test them. So we give them projects to do, and we pay them contract fees for these projects. They're all internal stuff that we have them do before we consider whether we're going to hire them or not. So it starts with the interview process. There's they have to be able to communicate in an intelligent way and answer questions on the cuff about requirements so we do a lot of role playing with people in the interview process to see, because we also need people that are good communicators. They can distill the information quickly and talk about it in an intelligent way. And if they're a developer, then it's about how, assess this code, give me your feedback about it. How would you improve it? What's wrong with it? Go ahead and build this thing for me. And how quick are they? And some people, it's very clear when you're dealing with somebody who's really smart. They just stand out in their ability to distill that information and create something out of it. And then we say, okay, this person's a strong candidate. We're probably going to hire them. Let's give them 1 or 2 projects and see how they do on it. The quality of the work that they do, and how quickly they're able to produce it. And really smart people with good experience can produce things dramatically faster than people who are a little less experienced or not quite as smart. So, and then the code they produce is smart too. So it's hard to find really good people that are really smart and experienced, but it's not impossible. And you just have to be willing to, go through 1,000 resumes to find, for every person you're actually willing to commit to.
Okay. I mean, everything you're saying makes a lot of sense. I'm just curious about a couple things then. If these people are that good and that smart, why would they work for Tekyz and not maybe go to, of course I can name the big names, the Facebooks, the Metas, the Googles, the, Microsofts, right. What's the attraction for working with a firm like yours?
Sometimes people come from those firms. We have a guy working for us right now that came from Microsoft, and he is really smart. But he just didn't like working for a good company. So, he felt like he was a cog, and he wanted to feel like he was more part of a smaller team. So, sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's circumstance. They want to work. It used to be a big one was they wanted to work remotely, and they couldn't at the company they were at. And all of our team works remotely. There can be a lot of different reasons. Sometimes they just take the people they're working with, right? And they're looking for a change, and we just catch them at the right time. Somebody that works for us recommends them and says, you want to work for this company. They're doing really cool stuff. These are all really smart people. They're fun to work, so it depends.
Are they all in the US or North America, or do you have people all over the world?
All offshore.
Okay.
Everybody's offshore. And I have traveled a lot offshore, 15 trips out of the country, between 2010 and the pandemic to build my teams. The idea that you're going to hire an offshore team, if I was doing that and I've had some contracting group and I was just throwing stuff over the fence, then it would be that typical thing that you hear about. We take over a lot of projects like that. I call them recovery projects.
Yeah.
The projects in recovery. And those are my favorite because those clients, and some of them are from companies, big companies, that are US based companies that we take them over from. Those clients always recognize how different we are from who they were working with before. They're usually my best references.
Awesome. So tell me, what is the launch first method?
Okay. So, and let me give you a quick genesis, why the launch first method even exists. So I worked with over 90 startups. And like I said, a few of them are really successful. Most of them, though, unfortunately fail. And they only fail after having made a huge investment and many years of effort. None of them fail after a few months having spent a very little money. And they all fail for the same reason. They lack product market fit. They didn't build a product for a market that wanted to pay money for it. And they waited way too long to prove that model. There's only one way to prove product market fit, and that's people are willing to pay for your product, enough money for your product, and enough volume based on the amount of energy you're putting into sales and marketing that you can show a 3-to-1 ratio between lifetime value versus cost of acquisition. And that way you've got enough margin in there to reinvest back into the business to accelerate that growth. So, and the problem is a lot of these is that founders come in with this concept, with the belief that they're going to be successful because they found a gap in the market and they know everybody needs this. They're going to be the savior for something. Yeah, right. And so they're coming into being a startup wearing a black robe, basically preaching the vision. And so what I try to do is gently peel off that black robe and try to slowly wrap them in a white coat and turn them into clinicians. And launch first is this process of basically saying, let's think about your startup. Usually nascent startups that are either at the design stage or even pre-design, but they have funding and they're ready to march forward building their MVP. And I say, okay, well, instead of building an MVP, because that's expensive, and MVP usually has a minimum amount of features and they're hard to sell. And you get all this feedback about what it needs when you put your MVP out before you can start charging for it very often. Depends on the founder and the product and the market. And so instead of doing that, let's not do that. Let's build a high-fidelity prototype, which is a very sophisticated design prototype. It's much less expensive to build than an MVP, and it shows the 2-year roadmap of the product, not just the initial MVP version of it. And it looks like a real product. So you can demo it the way you would demo an MVP. You don't give them to clients to use, but you can show them all the workflows on-screen functionality, and you can tell the story of what you're building, the full story, because it's all designed out. And let's do a really yeoman's job of understanding who your early adopter is. And that requires doing a problem statement niche analysis exercise that is very painful and tedious, but is very inexpensive, right? Because it's the founder's effort usually. And if they're really committed to it, they can get through it in a couple of weeks. So many founders fatigue through this, and so they take a long time to do it, but it doesn't take that long to do it and do it really well. So launch first, I created a metrics-driven methodology for doing this, because your number one job, I believe, as a founder is considering you have this thing you're going to build, and it will probably be applicable to lots of different niches in the market, and, maybe 10, 15, 20 different niches. And if you distill down the problem statements to root level problems that stakeholders in each of those niches would relate to, when you say the problem statement to them, they go, I hate that. And then they lean forward, right? And they say, can you make that stop? Because, right, that's a root level problem statement. And when it's articulated right, and you may have 10 or 15 of those that you're addressing with your product, then which of all those niches has one or two of your problem statements where the perceived impact because of that problem to the stakeholder, they perceive that as really impacting them in a bad way. Like they need to make that stop. They feel threatened by that problem statement. Their career won't advance. They're going to lose market share. Their revenue is going to die, whatever the reason why that problem statement is so critical to them and why they'll listen to you is because it touches a survival mechanism, right? That's what a real root level problem statement does. And which niche has one or two of those root level problem statements where that perceived impact is really high, they feel very threatened by it, and the cost is really high. So we do 2 matrices with these 2, with the niches across top and the problem statements down the side, and then we score all of those intersections. This is a tedious process, but it's invaluable because now your discovery interviews, which you only do 1 or 2 in each niche, if it's a niche you're not really familiar with. A lot of founders are very familiar with half of the niches that they could possibly market to and not with some of the others. So they're only reaching out to the ones they really don't know, those stakeholders, and only doing 1 or 2. And now it's very niche specific assessment of what problems they're really struggling with within the context of what you're trying to build. And then how you talk about what you're doing. You always talk about it from what problems are you struggling with, not I'm going to build this product that solves these problems, because as soon as you make that switch, the person you're talking to stops being honest. But if you talk about them and their problems and how they've dealt with these problems in the past and why it's such a struggle and if they've been able to mitigate it or use any product, then you're getting real honest answers from them because they're talking about themselves and what matters to them.
But at this point, do you have an MVP that you
No.
mentioned that do you have something to show them, or you're just interviewing people just to understand?
At this point, you're just interviewing. It's like,
It's just market research.
The wrong thing. You could be building the wrong thing, and you'll find out really quickly if you do this that I shouldn't be building what I was talking about. But I do realize that I can pivot just in the concept right now, and there's all this affinity to this other set of problem statements, and so. Right. So usually we're doing working on the design prototype during this period. The interviews and this process is helping inform the design prototype in terms of where we need to make sure it's really deeply fleshed out in terms of workflow and functionality. And the design prototype is very inexpensive and easy to change and pivot if we're getting different feedback. And it shows a much more rich functionality than what you get at an MVP and can be done much faster.
So when you say very affordable, and I'm sure there's a range, but let's just talk about a B2B SaaS platform that you're trying to build, you're trying to roll out as a founder.
Right.
What's the range to get a design prototype out, and approximate costs and timing? Yeah.
Okay. So if you go straight into doing design and MVP, which is what most people do, you're looking, depending on the product and the level of sophistication, you're looking at, and this is, I'm assuming it's B2B SaaS, and it's some level of sophistication, usually looking at between $50,000 and $150,000, typically what people will spend before they have a viable product that they can start to charge for. And 50,000 is on the low side. It rarely ends up being that low. And this isn't just us. This is typical, and it's much higher if you're and it can be a lot higher than that, depending on the level of sophistication of the product, whether you're using US or offshore resources. I'm assuming you're using solid, competent teams, maybe not exceptional teams, but these are not low cost teams because, you get what you pay for, somewhere between 50 and 150. And I don't know if that jives with what your experience has been to get your MVP ready for market, but that's usually what we see. A design prototype is anywhere from, again, depending on the level of sophistication of what you're doing, is anywhere from 10 to 25,000 for a fully fleshed out, looks like a real product when you demo it.
Is it using Figma or something, or what?
It depends. Figma and or Axure or both. Maybe the designs are all done in Figma, and then we wire it up in Axure because you can do a lot of more functionality. Though Figma's just about there now with all the add-ons you can add. So we're able to get a lot of it in Figma now. One of the problems with Figma is it takes so long to load the damn thing. Mm-hmm. So when you're trying to do a prototype, you got to make sure and you're going to demo it, you got to make sure that prototype is loaded before you sit down and start to demo, because you don't want those long pauses. It just takes away what you're looking for when you're demoing this. And the reason for doing all this and that niche and understanding the early adopter is because then we're going to put together a marketing plan to sell to that early adopter to do pre-launch sales using the prototype. And if the problem you've identified, they perceive the impact really high and it costs them enough, and the value you offer them in this pre-launch offer is a big enough value that they don't want to miss out, and then they will buy in enough numbers. You can prove you've got that 3-to-1 ratio before you ever start to build the MVP.
Makes a lot of sense, and sounds like a smart way to go.
Yeah, and you're generating revenue to help fund the development. So whether it's a brand new product you're building, or whether it's new features on an existing product, or, it doesn't really matter. This is it's harder to do this up front. I always say it's the hard, easy way, right? Because then you're not building your product for product market fit. That's not your reason for building anymore. You're building it for product solution fit, which is the reason why you want to be building it, so that you know that once the paying customers are using it, they're engaging with the product. It's satisfying their needs in a way that continues to keep them as customers, right? That's product solution fit. Product market fit is do I know how to communicate what it is I'm selling, and am I selling something into a market where they're willing to pay for it at the amount that I need them to pay for it? And that you can only prove by getting people to write you a check for the product, even if it's not ready yet.
Maybe you can share some examples of some success stories of companies that you've worked with that maybe have had to pivot partially or entirely along the way, but then they came out and they found the right product solution fit, and they were off to the races.
Okay, so we've been working with a healthcare related software company, and this isn't about launch first; it's just the pivot thing, right? For the last not quite 2 years. And they're in the healthcare space where AI healthcare, providing services to vulnerable populations, Medicaid populations, and they started out with and monitoring wearable devices with real-time triage capabilities, and an AI nurse that calls the patient when it identifies potential outlier situations that may require somebody to intervene. That was the original model. It has now shifted, and the AI nurse originally was just going to be a text-based chat nurse and help them schedule and things like that. It has morphed into an AI nurse for doing more customer service related stuff in nurse as an AI nurse that knows their medical history, can transition them from the hospital to long-term care, because there's not enough nurses to make that transition for big hospital systems when you've got 50 people a day going from the hospital to a long-term care facility, and all the things that have to be managed and the communication. And so this AI nurse can do all that and have a very natural conversation with the person, because she knows their medical history. She knows the capabilities of the facility they're moving to, and what their current condition that they're dealing with is, and who their doctors are, and if they need to connect them with somebody and actually schedule those things for them. And the person can interrupt them and ask questions, say, I'm not sure that's going to work, and then start and talk to them like a natural person. And they just received $5 million in funding because of this pivot that they made with a potential customer. The funding is coming from one of their customers. They have many investors already in the company, but this was their first real big tranche.
So is this not a traditional kind of VC funded company?
Correct.
This is, yeah.
Correct. Yeah, this was all friends and family and advisory people. That the person that runs this company has a lot of gravitas, because he worked in the National Health Organization doing a lot of predictive analysis around diseases based on preliminary information that before disease showed any symptoms. And so he has a very strong reputation in the healthcare community. And he was able to recruit a bunch of investors early on, many of whom became advisors that have a lot of reach in the healthcare space, in government, and in local healthcare. So, and then as a result of continuing to kind of refine this process, test different models, And the guy, the CEO of this company, his name is Kevin Longoria. He is just really smart and sensitive to what the market cares about. And when he saw that the market, that what he was originally trying to deliver to the market was going to be complicated for the actual end user, and it wasn't really providing them the value that they needed, and that there was much bigger value as he started to show this capability to other companies, they would say, we need the voice capability that you've just come out with. This nurse is just powerful, and we needed to offload all this work going to our nurses, which we just don't have the big enough staff. And then all of a sudden you're talking about, thousands of calls a day being done by what would normally be very expensive people in critical situations to make sure that people's transitions from one health facility to another are being addressed, or to remind somebody who's lower income population on a Medicaid program to remember to take their meds at a certain time, or to fill a prescription because they can see that they were prescribed something and the prescription had not been filled yet. And so many people that are prescribed things in lower income populations don't end up filling a prescription or don't take their meds, and they end up in the hospital with critical situations that cost healthcare system a fortune. And so you get the idea, right? It was
it's a great pivot. I didn't really understand what was the big difference between their initial setup, other than the fact that it seems like that there's a lot more of this virtual care provider, which is an AI agent or bot that is kind of being instead
originally,
of just,
originally it was built around your wearable device and predicting potential situations and
based upon some biometrics, right, or something like that, right?
Exactly. And that turned out to be not what the market really needed, because some of these things can be prevented by just some kind of by just like what I was saying with the lower income populations, just by sending reminders or making phone call, having a nurse call you. And the nurse is so friendly, and it's somebody you can have a chat with, right? I'm depressed. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Let's talk about that.
A couple more questions here.
Sure.
You mentioned AI, and we spent the last 5 minutes talking about this startup that is heavily relying on AI. I see AI from Tekyz perspective. You have both the AI tools that developers can use, and then you have the actual AI, the applications of AI and LLMs that they can deploy to make platforms more effective, or to help those platforms to achieve their mission, right? So maybe you can talk about, first off, what are the tools that your developers are using to help them with, speed up their development, and then talk about how do they keep abreast of all the different types of LLMs and everything like that, and then make recommendations to your customers about, here's what we can do. Here's how we can use this LLM or this type of AI to optimize the platform.
Yeah. So what you're referring to is what I call AI chaos.
Okay.
Right. Because nothing has ever evolved and changed as fast as what the AI industry is doing. And of course, that means things that were not consumable 6 months ago, even by the tech community, except for, top developers building sophisticated things using LangChain and RAG models, are now all of a sudden very consumable just 6 months later. And even the concept of a RAG model, for people that don't know, this is where you're using a large language model like ChatGPT or OpenAI or Claude or Gemini, whichever one, whatever, you're this new one, Riki, and what you're using that in combination with your own machine learning vector database that you built on a specific industry. And even that model is starting to shift, where that was the only way to have a really smart AI tool for your particular vertical. Now there's other ways of achieving that without having to go to building your own ML machine learning pipeline. About 6 months ago, 9 months ago, there was no other way to do that. So you wanted to have an expert, for example, like in your business as a financial expert, and not only on what it means to be a financial expert, but also on your particular financial model, what your investments are and how they're performing on a daily basis. Now you can accomplish a lot of that stuff without building this sophisticated RAG model. There are still lots of times when you want to do that, but less and less. You just have to do it for everything that was specialized. And there's frameworks for building these that didn't used to exist. And it's just, almost weekly, you look at the reports on which LLM is the smartest. And that keeps shifting in how smart they are. So to answer your question, so there's a big group of us that meet constantly, talking about AI stuff, what's new, what they're doing, what ideas they've had. We experiment a lot with internal things. We're building a lot of our own internal AI models for project estimation. Remember, I talked about being exceptional. Our project estimates are way more detailed than typical software company, and that's expensive for us to create them. And we have a methodology we spent years honing to produce these estimates. And so we're turning that into an AI model, which our goal is to actually not only be able to produce these estimates with very little effort, but even improve on the estimates with this AI model. That's an example of something internally we're doing. We are an agile company. So we use tools to support, we have our daily stand-up meetings and various things that go along with companies that are agile, which many or most companies are these days. One of the things that's a time suck is our daily stand-up. And they're supposed to be 15 minutes. They always extend longer because people get into discussions about things. So we're building an AI.
Just let me cut you off there for real quick. Do you do daily stand-up by customer, or do you do it as an entire team?
By customer, by project.
Okay. Yeah. So you're in a lot of, you're popping in and out of a lot of meetings, I would assume, because you want to keep abreast.
I am no longer in most of those.
Okay.
So it took me years. My director of operations is just exceptional. Director of development and operations. She's exceptional, and she runs all this now. Okay. And she continues to improve our standard on every respect. So I don't need to be in there. I probably just get in the way at this point. Yeah. I ran all this stuff for years, but it's been probably 4 years since I've needed to be in the daily stand-ups.
Okay.
And then I peek in once in a while. She wants to kick me out because I'll just get in the way. and that's also part of the philosophy. I said that IQ is like the most important thing. I won't hire somebody if they're not smarter than I am. And she won't hire somebody if they're not smarter than her. Because what happens if they're not as smart as you, then you're going to recognize what they're not doing quite good enough, and you're going to try to basically pick up the pieces and work with them a lot, spend a lot of time. If they're smarter than you in the aspect of the thing that you're hiring them for, then they're going to start to add new value to that delivery that you didn't have before. And they'll start to be the reason why you're improving, instead of just trying to get them up to the level of standard that everybody else is at. So yeah, that was a philosophy I came up with after having hired a few people 12, 14 years ago that were not smart enough and how big an impact they had on the really smart people on the team. So that philosophy shift happened very solidly.
Awesome. Well, what I'm hearing you say is, if you're trying to build a company and you want to build it fast and you want to be effective, there are some key takeaways here. One is hire smart people. Okay. Hire very capable people. Hire people that can predict with a high degree of accuracy of how much work they'll get done by when, that they'll build a platform that can scale on demand. And that sometimes it might make sense, instead of building that team yourself, is to just go ahead and outsource that whole process to an organization that has done it, in your case, over 90 different times. With 90 different companies. Yeah. That's right. And that's one way to grow your business fast.
Right. That will definitely speed it up, because if you're trying to do all that recruiting yourself, then you're going to be limited by your capability to do that. right? And if you're not a software developer and don't have experience in all these different areas in terms of building teams and recruiting, you're not going to know how to do those things very well. You can, unless you find somebody that can do it for you bring somebody in that has that experience, then they can build those teams. Or you bring in a team, somebody that assembles these teams for companies as an outsourced thing. And if they're really good, then it's going to accelerate things for you. But a couple things. I don't necessarily hire people that are super accurate at estimating. I hire them because they're really good and productive and can deliver. And if they're, and we work with them on the estimation part because that's more of a skill.
Yeah.
Right. And if they're smart, they pick up skills very fast. But something else about the scaling is test everything. Everything you believe is true is not true until you tested it and you have evidence that it's true. That's why I say when, on our banner on our website, it says a hyper exceptional software development team. But whenever I talk to somebody, I say, I don't want you to just believe me because I say that. Ask me for the evidence and I will show you the things that we were just talking about. And I show them examples of all these things. And then you should ask, if you're talking to other teams, ask them to show you the same things. And if they can show you these things, and maybe they'll show you other things that are even better, then that's who you should hire. That rarely happens because there's just not a lot of teams that make it their goal to never be good enough. I mean, it always is something that they can improve on in there. Strive to improve. Another thing scaling that's not related to what we do specifically, but it's related to everything you do in a company is once you've tested something and you see that it works, document the process to achieve it in a playbook. Because if you want to bring new people in, and you're going to scale your company and bring somebody in to basically delegate that to, it's an intellectual effort to train them if it's just in your head or somebody else's head. And now it's in two people's heads. And if you want to bring a third, and so you end up wasting the time of the person who knows this stuff until the other person comes up to speed. And then it's still not recorded in a way where you can say, there's our intellectual property as a company and we can scale. So if you document these playbooks really well, with all the reference links they need and all the nuances captured in the decision process, then you bring somebody new in and you still train them because you want them to have a personal relationship and understand the culture and the delivery kind of cadence from somebody else. But it will take very little time because now they've got a book that gives them all the answers to anything they could ask in the context of doing the thing that works already. And now you're just repeating it. Playbooks is really critical. Test everything. Then once you find something that works, document that workflow have the person that's doing it document it. And then you get that intellectual property out of their head and into a corporate asset.
Makes a lot of sense. Hey, David, if any of our listeners or viewers want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, and thank you for asking me that. My company is Tekyz. You can find me at tekyz.com, and that's spelled Tekyz. The idea, a bunch of techies sitting around the table. Tekyz.com. You can email me directly at david@tekyz.com. I'd love to hear from you. And I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn, David Hirschfeld, or search for Tekyz on LinkedIn, and I'll come right up.
Awesome.
And I also can I mention my podcast?
Oh, absolutely.
So I also have a new podcast called Scaling Smarter, as it turns out, and so it's about talking to people like you, exactly like you, and how you're using AI and automation to scale your business or to launch your business.
That's awesome. Well, I'll put links to tekyz.com and to your podcast in the show notes. I won't put your email address there because that's usually not a good thing.
For anybody that listens to this, I want them to have it, but
Yeah.
I want crawlers to do it.
I don't like to put it anywhere on the web. In the recording is fine, but once it's there, it's all kinds of funny stuff happens. But hey, David, it's been great talking with you. I've learned some lessons. Trust me, I've learned so much over the last year of running Breeze Docs and going through the development. And there were a couple moments in this conversation where I was like, God, I wish I would have done that. But it's all a process. And like you said, if you're in software development, it's not easy, and you have to be flexible, right? And you have to learn. So, hey, thank you so much for being on the Grow Fast podcast, and wish you an amazing 2025.
Thanks, and you too, Mark, and thanks for having me.
Cheers.